everybody. Al Bernstein, happy to welcome you to another episode of the show. And on this one, very excited because, as is our wont here, we get to visit with one of the very best boxing writers on the planet. This is, to me, kind of an interesting age of journalism for boxing because it's very different. It's mostly digital. And there are a number of terrific writers writing about the sport and doing a great job. And today we get the joy of visiting with one of them. He is a gentleman who has written for Ring Magazine. He has written for many, many publications and websites. He is currently with BoxingScene and doing a great job there. Let me welcome in Mr. Eric Raskin. Eric, how are you?
I'm all right. Thanks so much, Al, for having me on and for that nice intro. And yeah, we both span the we go back to the print era, of course, but now we're in the digital age, talking to each other over our computers, and there are still some print publications out there, I guess, but they're a little harder to find than they were when we were coming up.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, it's a different age, and with it comes different opportunities like this, the chance to create, things that where boxing fans can hear from people like you about what you've written. And that's kind of what I wanted to do a little bit today with you, Eric, is talk about some of the things that you've created here in the last few weeks at BoxingScene, which, by the way, is a great site, and I urge boxing fans to go there and to check it out. One of the stories that you wrote, which I thought was fascinating, was about Christy Martin and her movie, which is currently in theaters right now, Christy, which I thought was a very good film, and the woman that starred as her, Sydney Sweeney. As you do, you took a very interesting approach to it. You did an interview with them, but you centered some of it on a very unique thing because they kind of did a sparring session with each other after Sydney Sweeney had gotten more proficient at boxing.
Yeah, it was one of those things where, to the full disclosure of the way that the interview was set up, and I didn't make this clear in my article. I wanted to make it sound like I really had a one-on-two interview with them, but it was actually part of a round table where the few journalists were on there. And somebody else, actually our mutual friend Corey Erdman, asked a question that led one of them to just sort of mention offhand that they sparred together. But they didn't really say much. So when it came back around time for me to ask another question, I knew I had just heard the lead of my story if they were going to tell me a little more about it. So I followed up with another question, asking them to talk a little more about the fact that the two of them sparred during filming. And I don't know if this makes me a creepy old guy or what, but how often are you able to be on an interview with one of the top sex symbols of the day in Sydney Sweeney? And I have a clip of me asking a question, referencing how this is the coolest sparring session I've heard about since Rocky and Apollo at the end of Rocky 3, and Sydney Sweeney giggles at my joke, and so I have been sharing that clip with all my friends, and definitely like rubbing it in my wife's face a little bit, keep her in line, because clearly I have options. But no, honestly, it was real
video, right? Yeah,
I still have it. Yes, I do have it, But no, the fact that the two of them sparred together, even though it sounds like they weren't taking it terribly seriously, which is probably for the best. One of them is not a professional boxer, and the other one is in her late 50s. But the fact that they did that is really interesting and made for a perfect hook for the story.
And the movie, while it is not a strictly boxing movie, obviously, it has to do with her story of overcoming marital abuse and some other things as well. I thought they did a really good job of depicting that story and bringing that to the screen.
Yeah, I agree. And one thing that I mentioned in my story was in praising Sydney Sweeney's performance, the fact that within a few scenes of the movie, I stopped really thinking of her as Sydney Sweeney and kind of came to think I was watching Christy Martin, and I compared it to, I had just like a week earlier seen the new Bruce Springsteen biopic, which I thought was a good movie, but at no point did I look at Jeremy Allen White and stop thinking that's Jeremy Allen White from The
Yeah.
Bear. He never became Bruce Springsteen. Sydney Sweeney kind of became Christy Martin in this movie for me. The story is just so compelling. I think so many of us were in the dark throughout Christy Martin's career as to what was going on in her personal life. We had no idea. And so it was a few years ago when I saw the Netflix documentary about her that really opened my eyes to just how incredible her story is. And I think it was wise of them to say this could be a movie, even if the box office hasn't paid off. Just as an artistic achievement, I think it's a really good movie, and I'm hoping it'll have a much stronger life when it comes out on cable and streaming.
And that's what often happens. And Sydney Sweeney had a great comment about it. She said, sometimes you make movies because they need to be made. And they have a broader message, and they have something that's important to say. So you can't judge everything based on the commerce of things, though there's a tendency to do that. I'm going to digress for a second, which you and I do all the time with each other. You mentioned that about a believability of a person. I'm going to tell you that there's a movie that just came out called Blue Skies, in which Ethan Hawke plays Lorenz Hart, the man that wrote with Oscar Hammerstein. And it's a fascinating movie about the breakup of those two giants, and when Richard Rodgers got with Oscar Hammerstein. And when you see Ethan Hawke, they made him look like he's 5 feet tall. He had a comb over, and is this alcoholic 50-some-year-old writer. And for not 1 second did I think I was watching Ethan Hawke. I always thought I was watching a character. So it speaks to what you're saying, how, that can happen in movies, and it adds to the joy of it. Okay, so switching gears completely and totally, you wrote a column this very recently on BoxingScene, in which I thought you had a very fascinating take on the Jake Paul Anthony Joshua fight, which honestly, I don't even have a handle on it, period. But you created an interesting scenario about it and what it might mean for boxing. Explain that to I want everyone to read this story, but give them a nutshell of your viewpoint of how that fits into the pantheon of things.
Yeah, I hope they'll read the story and not only the headline, because the headline is a little misleading, and I noticed in the comments at the bottom of the article, clearly some people read the headline and reacted to that. Which happens sometimes with internet readers and commenters. But I was sort of trying to come up with some sort of positive off of this fight being made, because I am not high on the fight being made. Yeah. I think it's potentially a total disaster on a lot of levels. I don't have any expectation that it'll be remotely competitive. And there's just been so much negativity in boxing lately, and I've written plenty about it. It's kind of been a lull for the sport. Looking for something positive, and it occurred to me looking at this fight that this may be exactly what boxing needs to kind of get a hard reset. If this fight goes the way that I think it will, which is that Anthony Joshua absolutely obliterates Jake Paul in a round or two, depending on how much of a hurry he's in. If it goes that way, it could be the fight that ends this era of these. And nothing against Jake Paul, who has accomplished a lot given how late he started, and he takes the sport seriously and all that. Yeah. But he brought about this era of circus fights becoming the main fights, of unserious boxing sort of taking center stage. And I think it's in all of our best interest for that era to kind of wrap up and get back to real fights and top fighters taking each other on. And so I think this fight has the potential to end the Jake Paul era, end that unserious era, give boxing sort of a hard reset, and make everyone say, okay, that's over with. Some of it worked, some of it didn't. Let's move on. Let's get back to what makes this sport great. I'm hoping this fight can have that result.
That's an interesting take on this. And again, I urge people to read the story, because you explain all that very, very well. And I understand that viewpoint, because I've been a person that has always said that these uh, these events like the celebrity events and all the rest of it and the crossovers, they exist on their own and they're one-offs. But what has happened is they've become to the casual boxing fan as the face of boxing. And that's where the danger comes. You could have all these great matches going on at the same time. That's the one the casual boxing fans are going to say, oh, is that what boxing is now?
Yeah, and in Jake Paul's case specifically, his rise and the money that he generates and the interest that he generates has caused a lot of real fighters to sort of put the more serious aspects of their careers on hold in order to pursue a fight with him. I know the Gervonta Davis fight didn't happen, but there was Gervonta Davis who had a lot of real fights out there he could have taken. We would have loved to see him win with Shakur Stevenson or Teofimo Lopez or name any number of guys, and instead he was lining up to fight Jake Paul. It really is problematic in boxing to have someone who is basically a celebrity club fighter type of guy. Again, no disrespect to Jake Paul, but for how long he's been doing it, that's kind of what he is. For him to be, like you said, one of the faces of boxing right now isn't great for the sport as a whole.
Yeah, and the Joshua fight's similar because although, by the way, one of the reasons that I think Anthony Joshua probably will take care of business, and some people are leery of whether it's real and whether he'll even try. He's got still fights coming up that if he looked terrible against Jake Paul and didn't do anything, it would affect the marketability of those other fights. So I think he probably will do what you suggest. Anyway, people should read that story. There was one, before I let you go, I want to talk a little bit about one other story that you wrote.
Sure.
Because I found it fascinating. And I'm not one that does this very often. I am so anti greatest of all time, lists of greatest fighter of all time, pound for pound lists today. I mean, I'm like this guy. I'm some old guy in his house throwing stones at kids on the way by the house because I just don't get off on that. And a lot of people do. Most people do. But sometimes I find it fascinating. And your story was intriguing to me. You took the transnational ratings of today of the top boxers against the Ring Magazine rating in 2000, and you took who they had as number one in their various weight classes, and you said, how would it be if they fought each other? And I thought that was kind of intriguing. The first one of them, and we'll hit on just a couple of them that I thought were really fascinating, but one which I found really interesting was Alexander Usyk and Lennox Lewis. And I am a big proponent of the idea that Lennox Lewis is hell on wheels for any heavyweight that ever lived. And honestly, against any other heavyweight, if he's at his best and somebody put a gun to my head and said, you have to bet on somebody, I'd bet on Lewis. You also picked Lewis against Alexander Usyk, but it's a fascinating matchup, isn't it?
Yeah, that was one of a handful that were really difficult picks, and that one probably more than any other got the most feedback in the sense of I agree with all of your picks, except I definitely take Usyk over Lewis. I heard that from a handful of people.
Usyk, so I'm not like you. I'm not criticizing him.
Yeah, no, I mean, all Usyk has done so far is take on guys Lewis's size roughly and show that he can beat them. It's a difficult matchup to call, and that's sort of that's a nice one to have as the marquee, the heavyweight championship fight of the 2000 versus the 2025 era. But it's also sort of exemplary of the challenge in coming up with these picks. And let's be honest, I'm picking somebody, but I'm not like putting hours pouring into it, making sure I get it right. I'm trying to come to a conclusion within a reasonable time frame. But part of the challenge is a lot of the modern guys, the current guys like Usyk, we haven't actually seen them lose yet. And so that works in their favor. At the same time, a lot of the older guys, we tend to picture them at their very best. We tend to forget some of their lower moments, the ones who became Hall of Famers. So that kind of goes in their favor. So it's a tricky balancing act to make sure you're being fair to both of them. But in that one, I did lean toward Lennox Lewis. But at the same time, I totally understand if someone wants to say, oh, he got knocked out by Oliver McCall and Hasim
Mm.
Rahman. Alexander Usyk's going to kick his butt. You know,
Wow.
there are all different ways to look at these sort of
Yeah,
matchups.
I think in that one, the thing that tips the scales is you made the point. Usyk's fighting all these bigger guys and doing well. The only difference is Lennox Lewis is better than the bigger guys he's fighting right now. So that would be where I'd go with that. Now,
Yeah.
also a fascinating one. Um, you had Dimitri Bivol taking on Roy Jones Jr. in the light heavyweight division, which is also a fascinating one. And you ended up picking Roy Jones Jr. That is another one that, in my mind, is a pick'em fight, especially at light heavyweight, because that wasn't Jones. It was a good weight for Jones, but it wasn't his absolute best weight. And I am less on the Roy Jones is unbeatable freight train than some other people, even though I think he's a spectacularly great fighter. But you picked Jones to beat him.
Yeah, and I mean, Jones is maybe the perfect example of if you'd asked someone in 2000 when we hadn't seen the downfall that would come a few years
Right.
later,
Right.
who in their right mind would pick against that Roy Jones?
Right.
But now we can look
Right.
back and say, and you know, I guess an interesting comp for Bivol, stylistically, there's some similarity maybe in terms of the length and the discipline and all that with Antonio Tarver, who of course gave Roy fits.
Yeah.
Not that they're the same, but there's some
Yeah.
stylistic overlap. I
Right.
think there that if you wanted to make the case that Bivol is all wrong for even a prime Roy Jones, I could see it. But I'm one of those guys who does still have a lot of trouble picking almost anyone against a prime Roy Jones, which 2000 was still in range of his prime. So yeah, that one I didn't struggle with quite as much, even though I can see a case for Bivol. That one, it was going to be hard for me to pick against Roy.
A great one is at bantamweight, I believe, Naoya Inoue against Marco Antonio Barrera, which is fascinating, right? Because two iconic fighters, right, going at it. I forgot, who did you pick in that one?
So in that one, I took Inoue to beat Barrera, and so again to come back to that sort of recurring theme. I wonder how much I lean Inoue because we haven't seen anyone beat Inoue yet.
Right.
We've seen a couple guys knock him down. They're getting
right.
closer. But boy, he's just so explosive. I think about Barrera at that weight getting bowled over by the force of nature that was Manny Pacquiao. And I wonder if Inoue could maybe do something somewhat similar to that. But yeah, that was a tricky one to pick, and it's hard to pick against a Hall of Famer like Barrera. But I did lean Inoue in that matchup. And yeah, when we got into some of those lower weights, there were some really tough ones. I think the one I struggled with most was a couple divisions below that, where I had Bam Rodriguez and Mark Johnson as like. Boy, I still don't know. I'm not looking at the article. I almost forget who I picked. I can't remember who I took in that one.
Rodriguez, but you did it
maybe
with a lot of caveats. And yeah, that one I agree with you because people can forget how great Mark Johnson was. You know, and Bam Rodriguez is a future Hall of Famer. It's almost a given. And two left-handers with style, speed, some power. Yeah, that's a tricky one. Well, that was a great endeavor that you did, and I urge people to read that article as well. And again, the reason I think that's great is you even lured people like me in that don't usually go along with those endeavors. So there you are. You see, that's a true sign of a great writer, isn't it?
Thanks, Al. I appreciate that, and I'll give a hat tip then here to my editor Matt Christie. About 95% of the articles I write are my own ideas. This one was his, where he said, "Why don't we do a comparison?" Now, we had to fine tune exactly what the format would be and all that, but he deserves credit for the concept, and then I felt like I was back in my early Ring magazine days doing one of these fantasy mythical matchup type of stories. So it was fun to write.
Well, it was great. I urge everybody to go to BoxingScene, read those articles and everything else that Eric writes, and the site in general is a very good boxing site in any case. So, Eric, thanks so much for taking the time to visit with me. Hopefully we can do it again down the road.
My pleasure, Al. It's always great talking to you.
All right, thank you. That was Eric Raskin, fine writer for Boxing Scene, and he's just one of the many fine journalists that we've had a chance to talk to on this show, and always my favorite thing to do. We'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.